Middle Podcast, the podcast dedicated to the music, movies, and culture of Generation X.
What is up, Slackers, and welcome to another episode of the Stuck in the Middle podcast. I am your host, Jason Eck, and even though you wouldn't know this unless I told you, which I'm going to do right now, I'm recording on a little bit of a different night. Had to kind of mix some things up. The town fireworks display, of which Mrs. Eck is a big fan, is going to be held on the night where I normally record, so I'm recording it a night early, and here we are. Big fan of the 4th of July, so it is America's independence. For those of you who are in other parts of the world, to go, what's that all about? Actually, you know what? We're Americans. I'm sure we've told everyone that would possibly listen about our holiday and our quest for freedom from the dastardly monarchy that was Britain. So anyway, we enjoy it here in the Eck household. Certainly a lot of red, white, and blue this time of year. I did marry a good Midwestern woman, and you know she loves America and Jesus, and she loves Jesus and America in that order. God, country, family. She insisted for the longest time that there were no accents like that in Nebraska. Now, my wife is a big city gal. Now, one of her very best friends from when they were wee little bitties was getting married. And of course, Maggie was going to be a part of the bridal party, and I was there just as a date. Excuse me as I take a sip of water here. Well, it turns out that the groom, the husband-to-be, well, he's from a different part of Nebraska. And let me tell you, there were belt buckles, and there were bolo ties, and there was cowboy boots, and there was line dancing. And there was a lot of people sound a little bit like this. Talk kind of slow, not too fast, not like super slow, like some parts. But I was like, you see, I told you. And you insisted there was no accent in Nebraska. But in some parts, there definitely are. So, God's country out there, shucking corn. They're Cornhuskers. That wasn't meant to be demeaning. It's actually what they call their football team for the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. I forget what the University of Nebraska Omaha, what their mascot is. It's something else, though. I don't know. The tractors, because John Deere's from there. Anyway, what's this episode all about? Well, in some ways, this episode is related to an earlier episode that you can find here on the Stuck in the Middle podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. And I watched the documentary BRATS, which was written, I guess you say written because it's a documentary, but produced, directed, starring, and hosted by one Andrew McCarthy. And this is, of course, about the phenomenon. Again, that's what the episode that I had done earlier about the Brat Pack. And the reason I wanted to do the episode was, one, it was interesting, and I do recommend seeing this documentary. So just spoiler alert here. Some of this stuff I'm sure you already know, but it's also kind of what comes of it. And some of the things that I've been kind of talking about here on the podcast week to week. So just going to fact check one thing here. Excuse me. I think I have this right. Okay. Yeah. All right. So anyway, I've been talking a lot about age and my own age and coming to terms with just getting older, being 50. I know you'd be like, you've mentioned this for a few episodes. Yeah, I've just been contemplating and considering. And then interestingly enough, I did the 1994 episode last week, and a listener of the show who is known to some of you, I'm not going to mention it now because we have a future episode that's going to be coming up, kind of a in a way, a revisit of the 94 episode. And part of it is because it was evocative of a number of different emotions and things that I had mentioned about my own experiences around that whole time period, and how music is oftentimes a reflection of a time and a place, and how we get to a certain point in our lives. And even looking back at things, it's with a different lens and a different context, and things that were very, very challenging, and thinking about how or why you come out of them, or what are the things that have been limiting to you in your life that may have stemmed from an earlier circumstance scenario. And some would say even, traumas that have existed. What does that do to our psyche? And what does it do for us personally, professionally, spiritually? And in many ways, surprisingly, because it's not necessarily what I expected going into the documentary, I tried not to really look at too much of anything. I saw, briefly kind of the trailer, not even the full trailer, because Maggie's like, hey, I want to watch a movie with you tonight. And I'm like, okay, cool. Hey, I'm thinking about this. Let's watch the trailer. And she stopped me before it even got playing very much. She was like, yes, I'm in, right? Because it's a great topic. And so I didn't even watch the whole trailer. So I guess I was somewhat surprised at what became kind of an emotional journey. So again, this is where we're getting into spoiler territory. If you're interested in watching it, you may want to stop this now and revisit it later, or just my own interpretation and what I saw and how it relates to, like I said, we're going to have a follow-up episode about 94 and thinking about times and places and how different people can view almost exactly similar situations so differently. And it's not just a factor that each of us sees, hears, perceives, and retains information differently. It's sometimes literally our interpretations of those moments on an emotional level. So what I mean by that is, for those of you who don't know, the Brat Pack got started, and you can kind of make a rough idea of what you think the movie starting points are. Like what were the movies that really kicked it off? I mean, some will say it's a movie like Taps, right? Tom Cruise, Timothy Hutton, Charlie Sheen. That's like a first of, right? But then you have, I think, what many people consider to be like the movie that kicked the whole thing off, which is St. Elmo's Fire, right? So let's just take this for a moment. St. Elmo's Fire stars Emilio Estevez, Rob Lowe, Andrew McCarthy, Demi Moore, Judd Nelson, Ali Sheedy, Andy McDowell, and Mare Winningham. Now, this was a little bit older. And what I mean by that is many of these very same actors who were playing college students, which would have been more aligned with their actual real age, because they were all in their 20s. Most of them were 22, 23 years old, and they were playing college graduates. So their actual age in St. Elmo's Fire was the most appropriate to who the actors really were. But that same core group in various different, configurations were in all of those movies. Breakfast Club, most notably. Like, those both came out in 1985. So some of that same cast playing high school students and college graduates. Just kind of how it is. But this was like the breakthrough of a whole new class of artists, of actors who are poised to take on what we consider to be, pop culture or Hollywood, right? So this article that came out in 1985, same year, was meant to initially be a write-up about Emilio Estevez, who just so happened to also be hanging out with Rob Lowe, and I think maybe Judd Nelson or Andrew McCarthy, an author by the name of David Bloom, right? And he coined the phrase Brat Pack as kind of an homage to the Rat Pack. So I just want to say that he is in the documentary, and it's very interesting. But now that we've kind of established who are the keys, right? What was the timetable and how did this come to be? Why was the Brat Pack coined as a phrase, and how it may or may have intentionally or unintentionally impacted this group of young people? Now, some of the people who are considered tangential or not necessarily exactly the Brat Pack, but they kind of are, they kind of aren't. It really was meant to be like the St. Elmo's Fire cast, because they were all a little bit older than your Molly Ringwalds and your Anthony Michael Halls, your John Cryers, right? So those actors, a little bit younger than the rest. So they were never officially Brat Pack per se. So the whole documentary is really a journey of Andrew McCarthy trying to come to terms in many ways with his past and how the labeling, the maybe pigeonholing or typecasting that happened due to being considered part of the Brat Pack. And did others who were linked to it have the same kind of experiences? And this is where it becomes interesting of how different people have either viewed it at the time or even as their career extended and continued, their lens on where they once were. So you can also look at it from the perspective of not necessarily child actors, although some of them certainly were child actors and started there and were reaching this point in their early 20s of massive success and becoming movie stars on their own. But this is a little bit different than just your standard story about child actors, because it was more, you've reached unfathomable heights of fame and box office and sometimes critically acclaimed, having all of these accolades thrown at you. Like, hey, here's the next big crop. And then this article comes along. And for some, seemingly derails or at least puts a big, huge speed bump on the trajectory of their careers. So for those who are actually interviewed for this documentary, we have Emilio Estevez, Ali Sheedy, Timothy Hutton, Demi Moore, Rob Lowe, Leah Thompson, John Cryer, as well as a producer, Lauren Shula Donner, writer and director Howard Deutsch, and David Bloom, the actual journalist. So here's where it becomes so relatable. So Andrew McCarthy is starting this going, I've had this label attached to me. Now, he is 61 years old. It seems like some of the filming was done during COVID. So obviously it took some time. But he's like, I feel as though I need to talk to my peer group, because in many ways, all of them basically all went their separate ways. And many even have said they were never really a clique. They were never really a crew. They might have hung out socially, particularly on set while they're filming, but they weren't necessarily these close friends that the media was kind of creating like, no, they're all in this through thick and thin. And that wasn't necessarily the case. So I will admit, as an outsider looking in as a kid, I thought this was a group. Like they were the Ramones. I'm exaggerating, but like they were in it all together. And like, this is who they were. And it couldn't be further from the truth. So we start to see these kind of divergent viewpoints on the impact, positively or negatively, it had on their careers. And this is where it's the journey of searching for some kind of catharsis for something that you've carried with you as baggage for many, many years. And I think for many of us, we have a group of friends that, we had in high school or college that maybe you see each other once in a while, maybe you see each other all the time. But if you're talking about experiences, you'll sometimes be like, whoa, 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 I don't remember it happening like that way at all. Or if you have things that were shared experiences, you may have all internalized or dealt with them in completely different ways. And that's why this is such a fascinating documentary, because I'm going to break it down to you this way. Molly Ringwald, Judd Nelson, and Anthony Michael Hall all declined to be a part of the show. They didn't want to do it. And it just so happens, and not just so happens, I know how marketing works. One of my favorite podcasts is Talk is Jericho, hosted by Chris Jericho, who his guest, I think it's last Friday or the Friday before, was one Anthony Michael Hall, who has just been cast, I guess, for season 3 of Reacher, but he has been consistently working. I recommend the TV show that he had. I think it was on USA Network, The Dead Zone. And if you remember the cadence of his voice, if you think about Breakfast Club, for example, and he just kind of has that kind of voice where it's like, it's kind of fast, and he's like not really mumbling, but like he's just, like he just kind of has a cadence. Like, I'm failing because I can't make this, I can't make this lamp, and he still sounds like that, except his voice is deeper and he's older. And Chris Jericho asked him the question, so you didn't do the documentary? He goes, no, Chris, the reason I didn't do the documentary is that I have to be honest with you. I enjoyed my career. I enjoyed those movies. I enjoyed John Hughes. It was a great experience, and I've never shied away from those being my movies, those being my past. He's like, I think they're great. He's like, my favorite is Weird Science, without a doubt. It's so good. He's like, no, he goes, I do Comic-Cons and like all these different cons, and I've done reunion photos. I'll sign anything. It's like, what a great thing to be a part of. Like, no, it's nothing but good. He goes, I'm a little bit younger than everybody else. I wasn't officially a Brat Packer, and maybe I didn't have the same baggage. He goes, I don't know. I just kept working. And that was just such a refreshing thing to hear. But that means that he had always viewed it as nothing but a net positive, right? He got to do 4, technically, John Hughes movies because he was in the Vacation movie, the first National Lampoon's Vacation, which is John Hughes written, right? And then he was in Breakfast Club. He was in 16 Candles. Gosh, I think he was in something else too that I'm forgetting about, but nevertheless, he's like, no, it was always good. So one of the follow-up questions was, how'd you get through that? And he's just like, I don't know. I just always had faith. My parents were really strong, and it was all good life. And I'd have to imagine that Molly Ringwald and Judd Nelson have been like, I got nothing to gain from that. I saw Judd Nelson recently in some like bit part in this like weird kind of pseudo Christian movie, but like the ending was not Christian at all. It was wacko. But anyway, Electric Jesus, crazy movie. Anyway, the soundtrack is mostly Striper, so that ruled. So that's why I watched it. It was very, very odd. But nevertheless, it was just so refreshing. So then I'm like, oh, I got to watch this documentary, because he seemed to already anticipate, or maybe he'd already seen a cut or whatever it was, or maybe it had just come out. And excuse me, he just seemed so at ease with his life and his career. And I mean, he's done some great work, and okay. So McCarthy's like, okay, I'm going to I'm getting telephone numbers from agents and managers and calling in favors and getting emails, and I'm going to try to go ahead and get people on the phone. And he's gradually going through it. And he doesn't really say who declines necessarily. That's not explicitly said. In fact, he did get a call back from Judd Nelson, and they did a funny thing with it. So, check it out if you'd like. But anyway, so the first person that he goes to see is Emilio Estevez. So again, I'm trying not to be too spoilery, but it really felt as though Emilio Estevez was humoring Andrew McCarthy because clearly Andrew McCarthy was still struggling with this as a legacy, right? Something that happened when he was 23 years old that he feels as though ruined his career, ruined it. Now, mind you, continued to star in movies for a number of years. Shoot, I don't know about you, but I saw Mannequin in the movie theater. Mannequin. That's with, was it Meshach Taylor and Kim Cattrall, right? This is 87, 2 years later. I mean, let's look at Andrew McCarthy's filmography, right? 83, Class. 84, Benniger Gang. 85, Heaven Help Us. 85, Same and Always Fire. 86, Pretty in Pink. 87, Mannequin. 87, Waiting for the Moon. 87, Less Than Zero. Holy shit, Less Than Zero. 88, Kansas. 88, Fresh Horses. Holy shit, that's right. Weekend at Bernie's. 1990, Quiet Days in Clichy. Dr. M. Oh, he was in Year of the Gun. 92, Only You. 93, Weekend at Bernie's 2. The Joy Luck Club. I mean, yeah, it starts to get... Excuse me. Oh, I think the summer is starting to get to me. Yeah, it gets a little weak in the 90s, but then in the 2000s, he starts getting a whole bunch of work again. It's just a cyclical business, plenty of work in television, both in guest starring and recurring roles. Yeah, I mean, a consistently working actor. He did 15 episodes of Orange is the New Black from 2013 to 2019. The Blacklist, 22 episodes. The Blacklist also with James Spader. Yeah, so, I mean, the guy's worth $6 million. And I think for all of us, that'd be a pretty good chunk of change to have. But he feels as though, excuse me, sorry, that this limited his options because he would go in for a read and people go, oh, it's this fucking brat. Look at this guy. And not looking at him as a serious actor. He is no longer a thespian, right? Now, part of that is a little bit of taking yourself too seriously. So let's take a look at Emilio Estevez, right? So one, Emilio Estevez is from a famous family. So there's that whole piece. This article was written about him in the first place. And he basically said, yes, people still ask me about it. He goes, it's still like last week, someone asked me about it. And I just said, yes, it's a part of my legacy, my career, that I was a member of the Brat Pack and that, this group of young actors all came up. He's like, but where do you define the beginning and the ending of that? He's like, would you say that Young Guns is a Brat Pack movie? He's like, I wouldn't. But he's like, I consciously made decisions about the films that I took and even took roles that would separate me from some of these folks. And that apparently there was like this great script and it was supposed to be Emilio Estevez and Andrew McCarthy, and Emilio killed it. He goes, look, I'm sorry. He goes, it was one of the best scripts I ever read. I wouldn't work with you. So then this is like exacerbating Andrew McCarthy's old, see, these are great opportunities that I was not getting just because of who I am kind of thing. And again, like I said, Emilio did seem like he was humoring him a little bit, but he's like, look, he goes, I accept it as being part of my background. He goes, but it also I didn't let it stop me or limit me from doing other things. But if you think about it, I'm sure it was a great paycheck, but the Mighty Ducks, he got a few movies out of that, ended up doing like the Return TV series as well. I'm sure he did extremely well for himself taking on those roles, and he didn't take himself too seriously. He had to do lighter fare, if you will. Okay, what's the problem? He became a writer, a director, a producer, very active in Hollywood, continues to be. Okay. But again, it was this weird tension that kind of existed. And maybe it was just a matter of how the scene was shot, but it seemed very, very tense. A lot of tight smiles from Emilio going, "Oh, this fucking guy. Like, what's wrong with you? You've lived a blessed life," kind of thing. But he never really says it. He's very, very kind. He's like, "No, I felt like this is something that, you really needed or wanted, so I wanted to meet with you." So anyway, that was like the first one out of the gate. So he meets with a bunch of them and gets different perspectives and viewpoints. But here's where it took a whole different direction. Demi Moore. Now, Demi Moore was apparently already known to have had a substance abuse problem on the set of St. Elmo's Fire. She is 22 years old or whatever at the time and was considered a potential liability, but they really wanted her for the film. This is fascinating to me because I did not remember that she had been on General Hospital for years and then went and did Blame It on Rio, St. Elmo's Fire, and About Last Night. Right? So she's already like kind of a star and already dealing with the trappings of fame while she's on the set. So I don't think it's I don't need to do a recap here of like Demi Moore and her personal life and her marriage to Bruce Willis and still a very close relationship with Bruce Willis, and their families are blended and joined. And of course, Ashton Kutcher and all of that. This woman was an amazing interview, and you just have to see it for yourself. Now, she's had some work done. Many in Hollywood have. And it's somewhat of a bummer, only because she's still just stunningly beautiful. And maybe it's not work. It could just be Botox. I say just Botox. It's kind of a thing. And it's not mean to denigrate her at all. It's just the perception and the pressures that Hollywood puts on men and women to be eternally young. And it sucks. It really sucks. But anyway, like, she was just like, okay, we're here to do work. And it was fascinating. She's like, Andrew, listen, here's the experience. And like, just talking about like what each step of the career was like and how like this lumping together of young talent was seemingly very cynical. Like the article that was printed was cynical, but hey, look where we are. Yeah, it was hard and we've had to deal with it. And she was just like this ray of light. And I don't know if when he did the final edits that they were in the order in which he filmed them. I hope so, because it was that conversation with Demi that you saw this, I don't want to say a light bulb moment, but more a moment of, perhaps I've framed this in my head all this time the wrong way, or I haven't taken enough personal inventory in the 30 years since to make more sense of it. And that here I am doing it now at 61 because I've just never dealt with it, kind of thing. Right? And I think that is a very real experience for so many people, is that they just continue to soldier on in life with these things that are nagging them inside, that come from a place that could be 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years prior and never processing. And it was like to me saying, hey, dude, I was there. I went through it. I was already trouble. And it got worse. And you think about a couple of movies that she had that were absolutely savaged by critics, by audiences, right? Brutal. G.I. Jane, was it Striptease? Like, savaged. And she was just like, hey, This is life. This is somewhat kind of the trade-off with fame, is that we have these things happen and people print an article about us, and maybe it's unflattering, but you have a decision that you make about it, right? So very quickly, I think the next one, it actually went from Emilio Estevez, I think, to Ali Sheedy. And I'll just say this. Andrew McCarthy talked about having a crush on her back in the day, but the way that he had this sadness in his eyes and slightly like welled up with tears as they were having this kind of moment of how they both felt that originally it was this thrilling, exciting thing that then quickly soured, right? It was like, this is awesome, I'm a movie star, and this is what the industry thinks of me. And they had this moment, but he said, I used to have a crush on you. And she's like, no, you didn't, right? And just the way that he was looking at her, I'm like, holy shit, Andrew McCarthy still is in love with Ali Sheedy all these years later. It's just very apparent. But Ali Sheedy didn't have a ton to say other than she really leapt at the opportunity to be an actress and how she put herself into the characters and then felt as though there was no reward for that. The work was rewarding, but then the Brat Pack happens as a phenomenon, and she felt that roles were denied her. So they were very simpatico in that regard. So that's where Demi being next. Tim Hutton was not a member of the Brat Pack. He was kind of like their elder statesman, if you will. He was a couple years older and became super famous, winning an Oscar at like 22, 23 years old for Ordinary People. And he's like, I felt for you guys. He goes, when I saw the article, I felt it was cynical. It was insulting. It was rude. It was really trying to take the piss out of you guys and framing you as something that you weren't to sell papers. And that's expected. Journalists are in it for the money, right? Oh, journalistic integrity. This was entertainment journalism. This was not meant to be about foreign wars. And Lord knows, TV ratings became associated with war. Like the entire, first Gulf War was money for CNN and all those news broadcasts, right? So more things change, the more they say the same. So this is where Demi Moore was the first real light. Leah Thompson was kind of there because she was always kind of tangential and did certain roles in various incarnations. And she was nothing but supportive. She also felt as though she wished she was actually considered a member of the Brat Pack. She's like, well, why am I not included? I'm in movies with all these people. How come I'm not in? She goes, I wanted to be part of the club, if you will. He's like, yeah, but we didn't hang out. We weren't actually like this tight friends. She goes, yeah, I mean, I guess I've learned that since then. But at the time, I was the same age. And I'm like, what am I? I'm not a member. I'm in movies with all of these people. So that was so interesting, too. Oh, man, I wished I was a member of the Brat Pack. I wished I was associated with this cool group of kids. But instead, she felt like she was kind of like the outside. She's kind of on her own. Right? So interesting. But then the next, well, okay. John Cryer, I think his whole segment was rather brief. I believe that how I was interpreting it, he still talks to Molly Ringwald. He's like, have you talked to Molly? And, kind of thing. And he actually says right to the camera, he's like, I am not a member of the Brat Pack. Nope. Never have been. Never will be. Period. And his whole thing was also somewhat like, hey, you guys are like a thing. Like, this is cool. This is huge. This is awesome. But then he also mentioned the fact that, because they also talked to Howard Deutsch, who was the director of Pretty in Pink, and how test audiences, when they first saw the first cut of Pretty in Pink, okay, and oh my gosh, I always do this. I don't know why. This happened the other night too. It just went right out of my head. And it's so frustrating. Andy I can never get Andy in my head because I just think of her as Claire. Full disclosure, I was Breakfast Club. Like, that was my movie of the core movies, right? It was definitely Breakfast Club. Less so. It was probably Breakfast Club, Pretty in Pink. 16 Candles was never my thing. But anyway, Andy in the original cut ends up with Ducky. And the test screenings were roundly booed. Like, boo, shit on the ending. This sucks. Why would she end up with Ducky? This is bullshit. So they had to reshoot the entire ending of Pretty in Pink in one day. And Andrew McCarthy had already shaved his head because his next movie, what was it in the filmography here? He was doing a war movie. No, it wasn't Year of the Gun. What movie was it? Anyway, he was shaving his head. It was for like some movie where he was playing a soldier, and it was like, oh, so the final scene at the dance in Pretty in Pink, he's wearing a hairpiece. It's not his hair. That is fascinating. I didn't know that. And they go before test audiences, and they now love it, where she ends up with Blaine. A complete, inversion of what the screenplay and the director and everyone thought was how this film was supposed to go. It was, no. The nerdy true blue guy gets the girl, because that would have fit in with kind of the John Hughes aesthetic. Audiences did not agree. They're like, no, Blaine actually loved her. Blaine's a cool dude. So anyway, they kind of went back and forth on that. And again, John Carr was like, never been a member. But yeah, it kind of felt like a cool club to be a part of, to be perfectly honest with you. And I didn't get my membership card. So then the person that I consider to be the star of the show, and it should probably come as no surprise. So first there was Demi Moore, just a light. But given everything, the roller coaster that has been his life and career, Rob Lowe is such a cool fucking dude. And seemed so grounded and so real and so optimistic. And so it was those scenes with Andrew McCarthy that Andrew McCarthy, at 60 whatever years of age, finally had this true cathartic breakthrough. Because it was Rob Lowe who goes, hey, do you remember we were hanging out after shooting whatever, and you came in late and I was already there? And he's like, hey, have you met Liza? Rob Lowe says this to Andrew McCarthy. Have you met Liza? Yeah, Liza Minnelli. Because Rob Lowe is, of course Rob Lowe is hanging out with Liza Minnelli. They're ready to call it an evening. It's however, what o'clock in the morning? 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. Liza's like, boys, we're going to Sammy's house. Sammy who? Sammy Davis Jr., a member of what? The Brat Pack. And they go to Sammy Davis Jr.'s house. Rob Lowe is like, dude, that was so cool. That was amazing. We're in our early 20s. We're partying with Liza and Sammy Davis Jr. We're famous. And we have a cool moniker like the Rat Pack. We're the Brat Pack. Hell yeah. He's like, We are people's like youth. Like we have a legacy. Like people come up to me and of course it's Rob Lowe. They could ask him anything from The Outsiders, you know what I mean? To St. Elmo's Fire, to fast forward. It could be freaking Wayne's World or Austin Powers, or it could be sitcoms or dramas, or like, he's Rob Lowe. And he always looked at it. How cool is this? What a great life I have. Like, it's awesome. I have nothing to be like, well, you could say he has some things to be ashamed of, but he continued to move forward and never looked at it as this albatross hanging around his neck. He's like, oh, I agree. Like, the article was kind of shitty. You know what I mean? It was snarky. He goes, but I don't know. Like, just like us, we're trying to get the next job, the next role. He wants to get the next article published. If you don't get the first article published, you don't get the next one. He's like, we're in our 20s. Wasn't he in his 20s? Sure enough, he was. The guy who actually wrote the article, was it Richard Bloom, something Bloom? Legitimate David Bloom. He was like 29. They were like 22. And how it all happened is they invited him, Emilio invited him to kind of just hang out and like be a fly on the wall and ask him questions and those kind of things. And he's like, these guys are just debaucherous and they're getting anything they want. Because he's some 20-something, late 20-something kind of nerdy guy. And he's a journalist. And these guys were everything he wasn't. And Rob Lowe called that 30 years ago. Like, whatever. Doesn't matter. Like, come on, man. This is awesome. Our lives are awesome. And we have to embrace that. And at various different points, they talked about how people identify themselves with different characters. And they had a pop culture kind of a blogger, a couple of those, writers and those kind of things. And like, people would find ways to identify or see themselves in these different characters. And it made young people a prominent part of the box office experience. I think people are missing the point with all the Marvel movies is that in a huge way, that's kind of the equivalent, except these were sometimes very small stories. In many ways, they were with John Hughes. John Hughes is sometimes just writing things that were almost like plays, like stage plays, these smaller settings. Think about Breakfast Club is basically, for the most part, a single set. It's the library. Yeah, they go on adventures throughout the school. That's pretty amazing. I mean, it really is. You think about a lot of, Pretty in Pink. Takes place at school, takes place at the store, takes place at the house. Like, very contained stories. Obviously there are other crazy ones, throughout that time period. I'm not looking at a Ferris Bueller or something like that. But I mean, it was about the verbiage, and it was about the interaction between the characters. And Rob Lowe has his head screwed on straight. And you kind of saw as they were going through where Andrew McCarthy's like, hey, yeah, my life is awesome. I'm Andrew McCarthy, and I was a member of the Brat Pack, and I was in these huge movies, and I'm literally part permanently of pop culture history, of Hollywood, one of the largest industries worldwide is the film industry. And he was this huge part of it in multiple starring roles before he was ever even 30 years old. Let's just take a moment to, I'm just curious about something. Let's see here. Weekend at Bernie's grossed $30 million on a $15 million budget. So made its money back and more. Didn't really do as well for the sequel. The sequel basically came in under. Budget was 15 to 17 million. They came in about 12.7 million. It does not have good ratings. But anyway, the point is that did 30 million on a $15 million budget. Mannequin, which he did as the starring role himself, $7.9 million budget, did $42.7 million. I don't know. Seems like a pretty good gig. Lesson Zero was dark. Still made money. $8 million budget, made $12.4 million. Angel McCarthy, Jamie Gertz, Robert Downey Jr. That was a bomb, right? Yeah, Fresh Horses was a bomb. Never even saw it. That's Andrew McCarthy and Molly Ringwald once again. Excuse me. So, yeah, I mean, he had a few big hits. What did Pretty in Pink do? $9 million budget, $40.5 million at the box office. St. Elmo's Fire, $10 million budget, $37.8 the box office. And I don't know this one. Okay, this Waiting on the Moon. I don't know. It looks like a period piece of some sort. I have no idea what it is. So he had some really, really big hits and then kind of cooled off. But let's see. Joy Luck Club made money at the box office. What is this? It was direct to video. Okay, so he did start direct to video by 94. So I can understand why maybe he felt as though he was limited, but maybe he was limiting himself or his agents were limiting him. Because let's take a juxtaposition here of one Mr. Rob Lowe. So Rob Lowe, wow. Outsiders, Class, Hotel New Hampshire, Oxford Blues, St. Elmo's Fire, Youngblood, About Last Night, I don't know, Square Dance, Masquerade, Illegally Yours, Bad Influence, The Dark Backward, 92, Wayne's World, Tommy Boy, I mean, come on. Austin Powers, International Man of Mystery, Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me, Gold Member, Thank You for Smoking, I mean, he was in Super Troopers too. But then he just converted right over to TV like it was nothing. So his TV credits, The Stand, Larry Sanders Show, West Wing. I forgot about West Wing. 80 episodes. 80 episodes from 1999 to 2003 and again in 2006. Brothers and Sisters had 76 episodes? What? 109 total. Holy cow. I did not know that show was on for that many years. Parks and Rec, 77 episodes. The show had 126 total. He was in most. Code Black, 29 episodes. I mean, it seems as though he did quite all right for himself within just a few years. You know, it was like these guys all dried up in the 80s, but not really the case. Let's just take a look at Emilio Estevez. So again, he started even earlier. Badlands, Apocalypse Now, Tex, Outsiders, Nightmares, Repo Man, Breakfast Club, St. Elmo's Fire. That was Then, This Is Now. Maximum Overdrive. Yeah, dude. Wisdom. I remember that. Wasn't great. He wrote and directed it. Stakeout with Richard Dreyfuss. Young Guns was in 88. Young Guns 2 in 90. Men at Work along with Charlie. Free Jack, which many people have told me is wildly underrated, and I haven't seen it. in a minute. Mighty Ducks was 92. Another stakeout. Oh, he was in Judgment Night. Best soundtrack, meh movie. Mighty Ducks 2. Mighty Ducks 3. He was in Mission Impossible. Yeah, but he also directs, writes, produces. Hasn't done much TV-wise other than directing TV. Directing TV shows like The Guardian and Cold Case, CSI New York. Yeah, I mean, I guess he's doing okay for himself. Demi Moore? Let's just take a look here. Her filmography is much more robust. So yeah, we know all these other movies that we talked about, Brat Pack and Brat Pack adjacent. The Seventh Sign, saw that in the movie theater. She was a huge star. I mean, she was. Ghost, huge. The Butcher's Wife, A Few Good Men, Indecent Proposal, saw that in the movie theater. Actually, I think I saw A Few Good Men in the movie theater too. Disclosure, The Scarlet Letter, Now and Then. She was the voice of Esmeralda in The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Striptease. Beavis and Butthead Do America. Austin Powers, International Man of Mystery. She was a producer. G.I. Jane. Let's see. Hunchback 2. Charlie's Angels, Full Throttle. Like, just, it keeps going. And she didn't really do much TV. But I think it's so interesting. So when the movie was over, I went ahead and I was kind of looking at net worth. Ali Sheedy was at the bottom with like $4 million, but then it gradually increases the net worth, seemingly by the same measure of those who would not allow themselves to be defined by these labels of being Brat Pack or Brat Pack adjacent. Demi Moore is worth $200 million. Rob Lowe is worth $100 million. I think next on the list was like Emilio, like 60 or something like that. So it was just interesting to like think about how this really affected them, because even though people can become rich and famous, all of those things, they're human and they're going through human experiences. I cannot imagine me, the person I am, at 22 years old, being world famous. I probably would be one of those cases of didn't make it out alive, frankly. And as this film has gone on, as I was watching it and seeing Andrew McCarthy kind of come to these places of realization, of these places of truly catharsis, I think Rob Lowe really snapped him fully to attention. I think part of it when talking to Demi Moore is that you know how much other baggage and just levels of fame that she had dealt with, that maybe he couldn't even relate, although he definitely seemed to have breakthroughs there as well of trying to reframe kind of his life. And to have Rob Lowe so upbeat, so jazzed about this experience that he's had in life with some real negatives, and to handle it with grace and maturity and to be forthright about the mistakes that he made, like all of it. And it's kind of what you need to do. And I think that's part of it. Also, I'm considering, my own sobriety. I'm not even 2 years. It's a year and a half. And it's owning a lot of these things. So to see people who we looked up to, that we bought their movies, we went to go see them, we got the VHSs, we consider many of these movies to be really a part of not necessarily the soundtrack. What's if you don't call it a soundtrack, what would you call it? The movie reel of our lives. And it tracked with our own experiences. And we did find ourselves looking to hey, if I'm in the Breakfast Club, which particular person am I? Well, I was a little bit of an analog between Bender and Allison, right? I had traits of both of those, you know, and I couldn't relate at all to a Claire, right? So, or an Andrew. So Andrew McCarthy, thank you for making the movie, because I thought it was really an interesting kind of, not expose, a forgetting the word, exposition. Is that what I'm looking for? It was an exploration of middle age, and that looking back, that backward glance at the people that we have been, the people that we still, even at this age, aspire to be, and how we may or may not have had narrow definitions or parameters placed upon us from family, from friends, peers, our school experiences, teachers, people of authority, but then our own limiting thoughts. What that can do when you can break free of that. Frankly, some of us move out of state, kind of set up shop again, and take it from there, having these little resets in our lives. But yeah, Andrew McCarthy, this dude was struggling. And I don't know, it was just kind of cool to see him have an awakening at this stage of his life, to be able to have some kind of closure and some kind of realization that he's part of something pretty cool that maybe at the time felt bad, and that there's no point in regretting how you could have handled something differently. You did or you didn't. You become the person that you are, for good or for ill, and we have to accept who we are as we are if we want to make any kind of positive change. Like, hey, I am what I am, but I don't want to be X, is different than, oh, well, I am because of this, and if I had done something differently in 1998, you can't go back and fix it. All you can do is say, okay, now that I've accepted the fact that this is the thing that happened, what's next? How do I take this new information and make it something actually useful? Make it something transformative. So if you want to really see a cool little exercise on this, it's a mixture of nostalgia, but also the very real experience of human beings, mind you, very wealthy, very famous human beings who dealt with a lot of doubt, dealt with a lot of fallout from being that famous, but ultimately it's just a human story, a really cool, simple human story, and feeling that when we can kind of have this shared experience, which is why talking to people is so important. When you have that kind of shared experience, I think it's hugely beneficial, because you can say, hey, I'm not alone in this whole thing. This is why, whether you want to go and talk to a priest or a therapist or just people that you know and trust, sometimes just talking through stuff goes such a long way. So kudos to Andrew McCarthy. I recommend checking it out. Let me know what you think about this episode. Let me know if you watched the documentary, what you thought of it. How can you reach me? You can email me at stuckinthemiddlepod@yahoo.com. You can find me on Instagram, X, and YouTube at StuckPodX. Heading over to the Facebook page, Stuck in the Middle, a Gen X podcast. Please like, comment, share, leave 5-star reviews, and most importantly, please subscribe to the podcast. So until next time, later, slackers.